From the moment I first held Daniel in my arms, I promised myself that no matter how hard life got, he would never feel it. I scrubbed rich strangers' floors by day and tucked him into a second-hand bed by night, whispering dreams into his ear even when my own felt far away. I wore hand-me-down shoes with holes in the soles, skipped meals so he could have a second helping, and stayed up after double shifts sewing patches onto his jacket so the other kids wouldn't tease him. To Daniel I was just mom, a constant presence. To the world I was invisible. We moved often, chasing cheaper rents, safer streets, a better shot at survival. Daniel would sit on the stoop of every crumbling apartment building, clutching his battered backpack, watching the city lights like they held the answers. "One day, Mom," he'd say, his voice full of certainty, "we're gonna live in a big house and you won't have to work so hard." I believed him. Maybe because I had to. Maybe because believing was the only luxury I could afford. When he showed promise in school, acing tests, winning science fairs, I fought for every opportunity. I cleaned 3 houses a day to pay for tutoring sessions. I sold my wedding ring, my last piece of jewelry, to buy him a laptop for college applications. Every sacrifice felt worth it when the acceptance letter arrived. A university out of state, full of promise and possibility. I cried in the kitchen that night, clutching the letter like it was a ticket to salvation. He promised he'd call every Sunday. He promised he'd visit for holidays. First he did. Then slowly the calls came later and later. The visits stopped altogether. "Busy," he'd say. "Swamped with exams." But the truth slipped through in little ways. Hesitations when I asked about his friends. A tightness in his voice when I mentioned my job. Once during a quick call, I overheard someone in the background ask who he was talking to. Daniel laughed. "Just someone from back home," he said. "Not my mom. Not the woman who raised me alone. Just someone." Still I clung to hope, the way a drowning woman clings to driftwood. I told myself it was just a phase, that once he graduated, once he saw the real world, he'd remember who had been there all along. I spent sleepless nights imagining our reunion. Him pulling up in a new car, hugging me tight, saying, "Mom, we made it." I pictured dinners together, laughter, maybe even grandchildren one day calling me Nana. But reality had other plans. When Daniel moved back to Houston after graduation, it wasn't to my side of town. He rented a high-rise apartment downtown, a sleek glass tower that looked like it had been plucked from a different universe. He called less, visited even less. When we did meet, awkward coffee dates in overpriced cafes he chose. He wore designer clothes and a look that didn't quite reach his eyes. And yet, even then, when he sat across from me and told me he was getting married, my heart soared. "Emily," he said, showing me her picture on his phone. She was beautiful, polished, everything I wasn't. Still, I smiled through the lump in my throat and said how happy I was for him. How proud. "Mom," he said, fiddling with his coffee cup, "there's something I need to ask you." I leaned in, expecting advice on marriage, maybe help picking out flowers. "I need you to buy the wedding rings." His voice was light, almost casual, as if asking me to pick up a gallon of milk. My stomach twisted. I wanted to say no. Lord knows I should have. But all I saw was the boy who once believed we'd have a big house. The boy who used to slip his tiny hand into mine and say, "You're the best mom in the world." So I nodded, pretending I didn't feel the ground shifting under my feet. Later, when I sold the last heirlooms I owned, the bracelet from my late husband, the locket from my mother, I told myself it was just money. That love was worth more. That Daniel would see. That Emily would see. That maybe, somehow, giving a little more would finally be enough. I was wrong. But at that moment, sitting at a pawn shop counter under flickering fluorescent lights, counting out wrinkled bills, I still believed. God help me, I still believed. The day of the rehearsal dinner felt like a new beginning. Or at least, that's what I desperately wanted to believe. I pressed the only good blouse I owned until the creases disappeared, polished my old black flats, and tied a ribbon around a box of cookies I bought from the neighborhood bakery. It wasn't fancy, but it was from the heart. I told myself it would be enough. The country club loomed ahead like a fortress of polished stone and manicured lawns. As the valet took my aging car with a barely hidden grimace, I clutched the cookie box tighter and walked into a world that wasn't built for women like me. Crystal chandeliers, waiters in white gloves, laughter that echoed off marble floors. It all blurred together in a surreal hum. And then I spotted him. Daniel. My son. My pride. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, his arm casually slung around Emily's waist. He looked different. Taller, prouder. Or maybe just farther away. For a second our eyes met. I lifted my hand, a shy little wave. He hesitated. Then he smiled, tight, brief, almost painful, and stepped toward me. "Mom," he said under his breath, glancing around. "Glad you made it." Before I could reply, Emily appeared at his side, radiant and glowing. She extended her hand politely. "Hi. You must be Mary," she said warmly. "Daniel's family friend." Family friend. The word sliced through me sharper than any blade. I blinked once, twice, thinking surely I had misheard. But no, there it was again, casual and easy, like it was the truth. I forced a brittle smile. "It's lovely to meet you, dear," I managed to say, swallowing shards of humiliation. For the next hour I became a piece of the furniture. I lingered at the edges of conversations, nodded politely at strangers who didn't bother asking my name. I smiled at jokes I didn't understand and sipped water from a paper-thin glass, pretending it didn't matter. Pretending it didn't feel like being erased, one polite smile at a time. Daniel never looked my way again. Not once. I slipped out before dessert, the box of cookies still tucked beneath my arm, untouched, unnoticed. As I walked back to my old car, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded behind me. I drove home on autopilot, barely aware of the city lights smearing across my windshield like tears. At home, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the cookie box. My fingers trembled as I peeled away the ribbon. Inside were perfect little cookies, vanilla spritz, my mother's favorite recipe. I had made them every Christmas for Daniel when he was small. He used to sit on the counter covered in flour, giggling with every shape we cut. I thought about the wedding rings, the ones I had sacrificed everything to buy. The gold that once represented a future full of love, now felt cold and heavy. I imagined Daniel slipping one onto Emily's finger, smiling for the cameras, thanking everyone. Except me. I wasn't even invited to the wedding itself. Not officially. Daniel had mumbled something about keeping it small, about family dynamics being complicated. And like a fool I had nodded, pretending it didn't crush me. That night, lying awake, I realized something brutal and undeniable. I wasn't part of his life anymore. Not the real life. I was a relic, a shadow. Something to be hidden, not celebrated. And yet, a tiny ember of defiance sparked inside me. I wasn't just some family friend. I was the woman who had scrubbed blood out of his soccer uniforms, who stayed up all night sewing Halloween costumes, who skipped meals to pay for his textbooks. I wasn't a footnote. I was the foundation. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, let the ache flood every corner of my being. I grieved the son I had loved, the son I thought I knew. I grieved the life I had imagined, the family I had dreamed of belonging to. And somewhere deep inside that grief I made a decision. I would not beg for scraps of affection anymore. I would not stand in the corner pretending I was lucky just to be breathing the same air as my son. I wasn't invisible. Not anymore. The morning of Daniel's wedding dawned clear and golden. A perfect day, the kind poets wrote about and photographers chased. Somewhere in a manicured garden surrounded by polished silverware and designer gowns, my son would be slipping a ring onto Emily's finger. A ring I paid for. A future I was not invited to witness. I sat alone at my kitchen table, a lukewarm cup of coffee in front of me, staring at the velvet box that held the wedding bands. They gleamed innocently in the morning light, as if unaware of the betrayal they symbolized. The phone stayed silent. No last-minute call. No tearful apology. No, Mom, I'm sorry, please come. I waited anyway. Until noon. Until hope curled up and died quietly inside me. Then I stood up. Slow, deliberate. I took the rings, tucked them into my worn purse, and locked the door behind me. Not to go to the wedding, no. I knew better now. I was done walking into rooms where I wasn't wanted. Instead, my feet carried me aimlessly through the city, past old houses with peeling paint and new condos with mirrored windows, past playgrounds where mothers pushed laughing children on swings and old men played chess in the park. The city buzzed around me, indifferent. I stopped at a bench, sat down heavily, and watched life unfold. No one noticed the woman with the tired eyes and the velvet box clutched tightly in her lap. And for the first time I understood, invisibility wasn't something others did to you. It was something you allowed. I pulled out the rings and stared at them. 2 perfect circles. No beginning, no end. I thought about the sacrifices I had made. The sleep lost, the meals skipped, the dreams abandoned. I thought about all the times I sat in the front row of Daniel's life, cheering him on, proud even when it hurt. And now I wasn't even invited to the audience. The rage didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, a bitter taste at the back of my throat. Rage not just at Daniel but at myself for accepting so little for so long. I zipped the rings back into my purse and walked home with a new kind of clarity burning in my chest. When I stepped inside, the small apartment felt different. Less like a cage, more like a launch pad. I pulled out the lockbox from the back of my closet, the one filled with old tax returns, birth certificates, and my late husband's dusty papers. Maybe, I thought bitterly, I was searching for some proof that I had mattered, that my life hadn't just been about scraping by. That's when I found the envelope, yellowed with age, tucked between mortgage documents and faded photos. My heart hammered as I recognized the handwriting. My husband's. I hadn't seen his careful script in over 2 decades. Hands shaking, I opened it. Inside were stock certificates. Dozens of them. Companies I barely recognized, tech names, energy firms, small businesses that, back when he invested, had seemed like foolish risks. Curiosity turned to disbelief as I typed the names and numbers into an online stock checker. The screen flashed green. Then again. And again. Each entry revealed numbers that didn't feel real. 6 figures. Then 7. I stumbled back from the desk, clutching the edge for support. My husband, God rest his soul, had left me a fortune. Quietly, humbly. Tucked away for a future he would never see, but somehow knew I would need. I wasn't just holding stock certificates. I was holding my second chance. The tears came then, but not the bitter kind from before. These were tears of release. A possibility. Of the future cracking open like a sunrise. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't abandoned. I wasn't small. Daniel had erased me from his story, but he hadn't erased my worth. And now, without knowing it, he had set me free. I stood in the middle of my tiny living room, clutching those papers to my chest, and made a vow. I would no longer live waiting for scraps of love. I would no longer beg for crumbs of recognition. I would no longer be invisible. My son might have buried me beneath shame, but like a seed pressed deep into the dark, I had grown roots. And now I was ready to rise. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, the velvet box of rings still unopened beside me. The sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, illuminating the tiny cracks in the worn tabletop, each one a testament to years of use, years of endurance. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, but it tasted hollow. I should have felt victorious. After all, I had discovered a hidden fortune overnight. But instead I felt a strange, almost sorrowful clarity. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my life. I spent the next 2 days doing something I never thought I'd do. Taking control. I made an appointment with the financial advisor whose name my husband had scribbled so carefully decades ago. To my amazement, he was still in practice, now older, slower, but with a sharp mind behind kind eyes. When I walked into his modest office, clutching the dusty documents to my chest, he smiled warmly. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, after reviewing the certificates with growing astonishment, "I don't think you realize what you're holding." I laughed, a small, bewildered sound. "I'm starting to." He spent the better part of an hour explaining my options, drawing out plans, talking about investments and trusts and portfolios. Words that once would have made me feel like a trespasser in a world too rich for my blood. But not today. Today I was the one in control. By the time I left his office, I had opened a personal account, set up a trust for myself, and placed the rest into investments that would secure my future. Not Daniel's. Mine. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter, taller. The world, once so heavy, seemed full of new air. And then, as if summoned by fate, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice bright, casual, forced. "Just checking in. Big day tomorrow, huh?" Big day. His wedding. The one he hadn't invited me to. I swallowed the bitterness and answered calmly. "Yes, a big day. I just wanted to make sure you have the rings," he continued. "You know, we'll need them at the ceremony." I smiled, a tight, private smile he couldn't see. "Don't worry, Daniel. I have them." He sighed with relief. "Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver." He hung up without asking how I was doing, without inviting me, without even a hint of the apology I had once so desperately wished for. And that was when I made my decision. That night, instead of wrapping the rings or preparing a gift, I sat down at my old laptop. I opened a folder I'd been quietly collecting for months. Screenshots of messages, emails, small cruelties Daniel thought had vanished into the ether. Comments he had made about hiding his upbringing, about being embarrassed by where he came from, about being embarrassed by me. I copied them all onto a flash drive. Then I wrote a letter. Not to Daniel. To Emily. I was careful with my words, calm, honest, unflinching. I didn't accuse. I didn't beg. I simply told the truth. The truth about the woman who had bought their wedding rings with the last of her savings, who had stood alone in a glittering room, invisible. The truth about the man she was marrying. I slipped the flash drive and the letter into a padded envelope. And then I placed the velvet box of rings inside as well. A gift. Not out of spite. Out of mercy. Because love built on lies would never survive. And if she was smart, she would see the truth before it destroyed her too. At dawn, I dropped the package at the post office with overnight delivery instructions. No return address. No forwarding. No regrets. As the clerk stamped the label and tossed the envelope into a canvas bin, I felt a strange, bittersweet peace wash over me. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Emily would believe me, or if Daniel would finally face himself. But for once it wasn't my burden to carry. I had handed back the weight they had placed on me. And now? Now I was free to step into the sunlight. On my own. No apologies. No shame. Only freedom. The morning of Daniel's wedding arrived, but my house was silent. No frantic dressing. No searching for lost shoes or forgotten invitations. No laughter, no nerves. Just me, my coffee, and the knowledge that somewhere across the city, my son was preparing for the biggest day of his life. A day I wasn't meant to be a part of. The package had been delivered the night before. I imagined Emily opening it, her manicured fingers peeling back the tissue paper, her bright future flickering the moment the truth was revealed. But I didn't wonder for long. I had other things to do. Instead of mourning a celebration I was never invited to, I began taking steps to rebuild something far more important, myself. That morning I made another call to the financial advisor. I set up meetings with nonprofit organizations, groups that supported women like me. The forgotten, the overlooked, the invisible. By noon, I had signed up to volunteer at 2 local shelters, offering mentorship for women trying to re-enter the workforce after years of being sidelined. Me, a woman who had once been ashamed to even say what she did for a living, was now standing tall, offering a hand to others. Funny how life shifts when you stop asking for permission to matter. The wedding went on without me. I didn't cry. I didn't even check my phone. Instead, I baked a loaf of bread. A recipe my mother had taught me when I was just a girl, kneading the dough with hands that were still strong despite the years, despite the heartaches. The house smelled like home, like resilience, like beginning again. That night, as the city lights blinked in the distance, I sat on my tiny porch and thought about all the things Daniel had missed. He missed the woman who had scrubbed marble floors and saved every penny, not for herself but for him. He missed the woman who stayed up sewing patches onto his jeans when there was no money for new clothes. He missed the woman who never once asked for gratitude, only for a little respect. But most of all, he missed the woman who had finally learned that love without respect is not love at all. I stayed up late watching the stars, wondering if Emily would call, if Daniel would rage. Maybe he would spin the story to make himself look like the victim. Maybe he would double down on the lies. But none of it mattered anymore. I had set the truth free, and now it would do what truth always does: find a way to rise. The next morning the phone finally rang. I let it buzz twice before answering. "Mom!" Daniel's voice cracked through the line, sharp and furious. "What did you do?" I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the taste. "I told the truth. You had no right." "I had every right," I said calmly, cutting him off. "I gave you everything I had, Daniel. And you erased me." A long, shuddering silence filled the space between us. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "No," I replied, my voice as steady as the sunrise outside my window. "You did that all by yourself." He hung up. I placed the phone back on the table without a second thought. Across town there would be chaos. Angry parents, broken promises, shattered images of a perfect life. But here in my little kitchen there was only peace. Not the kind born from forgiveness. The kind born from finally letting go. Later that afternoon, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, studying my reflection. For the first time in years, I didn't see a tired cleaning lady or a forgotten mother. I saw a woman reborn. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed the lines of my simple dress, and whispered to my reflection, "You were never invisible. You were never small." The world had tried to make me feel small, to crush me under shame and silence. But here I was, still standing, still shining. Daniel's story would continue without me. His choices would follow him into every room he entered, every lie he tried to patch over. But mine was just beginning, and it would be written in bold, brilliant colors that no one could erase. The days after the wedding passed like slow-moving clouds. I didn't hear from Daniel again. Not a call, not a text, nothing. The silence could have broken me once, but not anymore. Instead, I focused on my new life, a life built on truth, on dignity, not on chasing the approval of people who had long ago decided I wasn't enough. Each morning I volunteered at the local shelter, helping women who, like me, had been invisible for too long. Each evening I sat by my small window, the fading sunlight painting golden stripes across the floor, and I planned the future that had once seemed out of reach. One afternoon, as I was organizing paperwork for a community outreach event, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it. "Hi Mary. My name is Emily. I think we need to talk." My heart skipped. I hadn't expected to hear from her again. I thought perhaps she had chosen to stay silent, to pretend none of it had happened. But no. There she was, reaching out, not through Daniel, not through anger, but directly, bravely. I hesitated for a long moment before replying. "When and where?" Her answer was immediate. "Tomorrow. Lunch. My treat." The next day I dressed carefully, not to impress but to armor myself. Simple slacks, a soft sweater, my wedding ring tucked away in a drawer where it belonged. I met Emily at a small cafe downtown, far away from the glittering country clubs and gated communities where our worlds had briefly collided. She was already there, sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. She looked up as I approached, and for the first time I saw not just a beautiful young woman but someone humbled, changed. "Mary," she said, standing up awkwardly. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, sliding into the seat across from her. For a few moments neither of us spoke. The cafe buzzed softly around us. Clinking cups, low conversations, the hiss of steam from the espresso machine. Finally, Emily cleared her throat. "I owe you an apology," she began, voice trembling slightly. "Not just for what happened, but for not seeing you sooner." I stayed silent, letting her speak. "I believed what Daniel wanted me to believe," she continued. "I accepted the polished version of his life because it was easier. Because I didn't want to look too closely." She wiped at her eyes quickly, embarrassed. But when I saw everything, the screenshots, the messages, the rings, I realized the truth. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. I nodded slowly. That's the thing about the truth, I said. It waits. Patiently. Until you're ready. Emily gave a watery smile. I'm ready now, she said. And I want to help. If you'll let me. I raised an eyebrow. Help. She leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. I run a foundation. We offer scholarships, mentorships, support for women rebuilding their lives. I'd like you to join us. Not as charity, Mary, as a leader. The words hung between us like a challenge and a gift all at once. A leader. Me. Not invisible. Not erased. Chosen. Valued. Seen. I sipped my tea slowly, considering. I thought about the years I'd spent folding myself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into spaces that had never been meant for me. I thought about the strength it had taken to stop. And then I smiled. I'm not looking for handouts, I said. Emily shook her head firmly. I'm offering you a partnership, she said. Your experience, your strength, your story, it matters. It could change lives. For the first time in a long time, I believed it. Not because someone was telling me I had value, but because I had finally learned to see it for myself. I reached across the table, shook her hand. All right, I said. Let's change some lives. Including mine. Especially mine. And just like that, a new chapter began. Not built on shame or silence. Built on truth. On worth. On rising. The first day at Emily's foundation was both terrifying and exhilarating. I stepped into a world of glass walls, open spaces, bright minds, and bigger dreams than I had ever dared imagine. Gone were the bleach-scented hallways of the houses I used to clean. Gone was the feeling of shrinking into corners, of apologizing for simply existing. Now I stood tall, clipboard in hand, as women much younger than me turned toward me with expectation in their eyes, ready to listen. And oh, I had things to say. I started small. Organizing outreach events, coordinating mentorship programs, reaching out to women who had been forgotten the way I once was. Each phone call, each meeting was a stitch in a tapestry I hadn't known I was capable of weaving. And with every success, with every email that ended with, "Thank you, Mary, for believing in me," a part of me healed. Still, the ghosts of the past weren't entirely gone. One afternoon, as I was reviewing grant applications, a knock sounded on my office door. I expected Emily, or maybe one of the younger staff members. But when I looked up, my breath caught. Daniel stood there, awkward, out of place, clutching a manila envelope like a lifeline. He looked thinner, more tired than the last time I'd seen him. I considered telling him to leave. I considered pretending I didn't see him at all, the way he once did to me. But instead I said, "Come in." He stepped inside carefully, as if afraid the floor might crack beneath his weight. He didn't sit. Instead, he set the envelope down on the edge of my desk. "I know I don't have the right," he began, voice raw, "but I needed you to have this. I didn't reach for it." He swallowed hard, continued. "It's everything. My letters, my regrets. Things I should have said years ago. I didn't know how to fix what I broke." The silence between us stretched taut. I watched him, this man who once was a boy holding my hand at the bus stop, now standing like a stranger. "I don't expect anything," he said. I wanted you to know I'm trying." With that, he turned and left, leaving the envelope behind. I didn't touch it for hours. It sat there like a wound I wasn't sure I was strong enough to open. But eventually curiosity and something deeper won. Inside were handwritten letters, dated over the past several weeks. Apologies. Confessions. Stories about how he had realized too late the cost of building a life on shame and silence. He spoke of nights spent alone, haunted by the sound of my voice, by the memory of my sacrifices. He spoke of watching me at the rehearsal dinner, standing apart from the crowd, and realizing too late that he had severed the only unconditional love he had ever known. Some letters were messy, frantic, ink-smudged where he had clearly tried to hold back tears. Others were neat, deliberate, like he had rewritten them over and over, desperate to find the right words. By the time I finished reading, my heart felt raw, scraped clean. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It doesn't erase the past. It doesn't undo the hurt. But it gives you a place to set it down, to stop carrying it like a burden stitched into your skin. I folded the letters carefully, placed them in the bottom drawer of my desk, not because I was hiding them, but because they no longer needed to be in plain sight. They were acknowledged, accepted, and now they were behind me. That evening I sat on my porch, a cup of tea warming my hands, watching the stars blink to life. I thought about the life I had lived, the sacrifices, the betrayals, the unexpected twists that had brought me here. I thought about Daniel, and I thought about myself. Not the woman waiting for scraps of love. Not the woman bending herself into silence to be accepted. But the woman who had stood, spoken, fought, and risen. Maybe Daniel would rebuild his life. Maybe he wouldn't. But either way, I knew one thing. I wasn't his foundation anymore. I was my own. And this time I was unshakable. The days that followed felt different. Lighter. Like I had finally put down a burden I'd been carrying for so long I forgot what it felt like to stand tall without it. But life, as it often does, wasn't finished surprising me yet. One afternoon, Emily knocked gently on my office door. She wore a strange expression. A mix of excitement and hesitation. "Mary," she said, stepping inside. "There's someone you should meet." Before I could ask, the door swung open wider, and in walked a woman, poised, graceful, but with the kind of nervousness that couldn't be masked by good posture or expensive clothes. "This is Evelyn Walsh," Emily explained. Evelyn smiled tightly. "My family owns Walsh Real Estate," she said, almost apologetically, like she already sensed how that might sound to someone like me. I simply nodded, waiting. "I'm here," she continued, "because I've been funding scholarships for underprivileged women for years. But I realized I was funding dreams I didn't really understand." Her voice cracked slightly. "I want to fix that." Emily smiled at me over Evelyn's shoulder, a silent message. "This is your moment." Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. "I was hoping," she said, "that you would share your story with my board. Not for pity. For perspective." I blinked. A few months ago I was standing outside a country club, invisible. Now I was being asked to stand inside boardrooms, to be heard by people who usually only listen to numbers and reports. "I'll think about it," I said calmly, though inside my heart thundered. 2 weeks later, I stood at the head of a long mahogany table. Oil paintings of grim-faced men stared down from the walls. The board members, mostly older, mostly polished to a cold perfection, listened as I spoke. I told them about scrubbing floors until my knees ached, about packing second-hand lunches for a boy who would someday pretend I didn't exist, about believing for too long that dignity was something you earned by staying silent. And I watched their faces change. One by one the masks slipped. Eyes softened. Throats cleared. Fingers tapped nervously against gold-plated pens. I wasn't begging for sympathy. I wasn't performing shame. I was holding up a mirror. And when I finished, Evelyn stood and clapped. Alone at first, then slowly others joined. A few days later, Evelyn contacted me again. She didn't just want me to speak. She wanted me to sit on the advisory board for the new scholarship initiative, Mary's Promise. Named not for the woman they had erased, but for the woman who refused to stay invisible. It was surreal. Standing on the broken pieces of a life I thought had ended, and realizing they were the foundation for something new. And yet, even amid the victories, the old scars itched. Late one night, as I was organizing my notes for the upcoming board meeting, my phone buzzed. A text. From Daniel. "I saw the scholarship name today. Mary's Promise. It's beautiful, Mom. You're beautiful. I'm proud of you. Always was. I was just too small to admit it. I hope one day you'll let me earn my way back." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't cry for sadness this time. It was grief, yes, but it was the kind that blooms into something else. Something almost like hope. Not the desperate hope I used to carry. The hope that begged for scraps of affection. This was a quieter hope. A sturdier one. One that knew love couldn't erase wounds, but maybe, just maybe, it could honor them. I didn't text back. Not yet. Some roads you can't rush. But for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like a mother abandoned. I felt like a woman who had chosen herself and was being chosen by a world that finally saw her worth. I closed the phone gently. And I smiled. Not because he had finally seen me, but because I had seen myself first. The months after launching Mary's Promise were the busiest and brightest of my life. I traveled. I spoke. I met women who carried their own invisible histories, women who, like me, had been the backbone of dreams that were never fully theirs. Each story cracked me open a little more, letting light pour into places I hadn't realized were still dark. But no matter how far I went, I always returned home. To my small sun-drenched apartment. To my modest garden where the sunflower stretched taller than me. And to the quiet, the beautiful sovereign quiet, that used to feel like loneliness but now felt like freedom. Then one evening, as twilight smeared gold across the sky, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found a small envelope sitting on the mat. No return address. No note. Just my name written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. For a long time I simply stared at it. Afraid to hope. Afraid to hurt. Finally I picked it up, closed the door and sat at the kitchen table. I opened it slowly, like unwrapping a wound. Inside was a letter. Not typed. Not hurried. Written by hand, every word deliberate, shaped by someone who had been broken open and was trying to rebuild with trembling hands. Mom, I know I'm the last person who deserves your forgiveness. I know apologies are easy to say and harder to live. But I'm writing this not because I expect anything from you, but because you deserve the truth. I buried you in shame because I was ashamed of myself. I tried to erase you because I couldn't erase where I came from. I thought success meant cutting away my roots, but all I did was cut away the best parts of myself. You were never the embarrassment, Mom. You were the reason I had a chance at anything at all. I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I don't know if you'll even want me back in your life. But I'm here. I'm trying. And I'll keep trying whether you see it or not, because you deserve a son who shows up. Thank you for raising me. I'm sorry for how long it took me to realize it. With love, Daniel. I folded the letter carefully, my fingers trembling. It didn't undo the past. It didn't erase the scars. But it was a seed. A small tentative offering planted in the soil of everything we had both broken and lost. I sat there for a long time, letting the emotions ripple through me. Anger, sorrow, pride, relief. Not because he finally admitted he was wrong, but because, for once, he wasn't asking for forgiveness like it was a transaction. He was giving it room to breathe, to be chosen freely. That night I didn't text him. I didn't call. I went outside instead, into the cool night air. I stood among the sunflowers, their golden faces turned toward the last light of day. And I realized something. Forgiveness isn't a door someone knocks on. It's a garden you grow. Slowly. Patiently. Tending to it every day, even when it feels barren. Even when no one else can see the blossoms yet. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to plant something new. Not for Daniel. Not for the past. For me. For the future. I looked up at the stars, letting the cool wind kiss my cheeks, and I whispered into the night. I'm not lost. I'm not broken. I'm finally coming home to myself. And for the first time I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone to meet me there. I was already home. All along. The day I truly realized how far I had come wasn't loud. There were no parades. No breaking news headlines. It was quiet. Almost sacred. I had just returned from a leadership conference in New York City. A whirlwind of lights, applause, and voices that said, "We see you." I dropped my suitcase by the door, kicked off my shoes, and walked into the kitchen. The apartment smelled like lavender and fresh coffee, a small comfort I had learned to gift myself. On the table, a single envelope sat. No postage. No address. Just my name again, Mary, written in a hand that trembled slightly against the white. Daniel. This time I didn't hesitate. I opened it. Inside was a photograph. Old. Worn at the edges. It was a picture of Daniel at 5 years old, sitting on my lap, grinning so wide his front teeth were missing. Behind us was our tiny kitchen, mismatched chairs, and a cake I had baked from scratch. On the back of the photo, a single sentence. "You were always my home." I just forgot how to find my way back. No explanations. No apologies this time. Just truth. Raw and bare. I pressed the photo to my chest and let the weight of it settle into my ribs. Not sadness. Not regret. Acceptance. The boy I raised still lived somewhere inside the man who had lost his way. But the difference was I wasn't waiting for him to return anymore. I had built my life. Brick by brick. Without needing to be rescued. Without needing to be chosen. I chose myself. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from the national nonprofit Emily had helped me connect with. They offered me a position. Regional director. Full benefits. A salary higher than I had ever dreamed. And a platform to continue telling my story to women who still sat in shadows waiting to be seen. I stood in the middle of my living room, the offer letter in hand, and laughed until tears ran down my face. Not because it was funny, but because it was beautiful. Because once upon a time I had believed life had passed me by. And now it was stretching before me like a sunrise I never thought I'd live to see. Later that evening, I took the photo Daniel had sent me and placed it in a simple frame. I didn't hide it in a drawer. I didn't banish it to a box of memories. I set it proudly on the mantel, right beside a photo of myself standing on stage in New York. A microphone in one hand, my heart blazing in the other. Not to remember the pain, but to honor the journey. The woman I used to be. The woman I had become. Both deserved a place on that shelf. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and fire, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea in hand, watching the sunflowers sway in the gentle breeze. There was no bitterness left in me. No need to prove anything anymore. Daniel had his journey. I had mine. And maybe one day those roads would cross again. But I no longer needed them to, because I wasn't walking toward anyone anymore. I was walking toward myself. Toward the life I had fought for, bled for, dreamed for. And I had arrived. At last. At home within my own skin. At home within my own heart. I was not a footnote in someone else's story anymore. I was the author of my own. And that, more than any apology, any recognition, any validation, was the greatest triumph of all. I took a deep breath, smiled up at the endless open sky and whispered, "Thank you." Not to Daniel. Not to the world. But to the woman who had stayed. The woman who had risen. The woman who had finally, gloriously, come home.